loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who hast by Thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met Thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget Thee, shadowed beneath Thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. Thank you. Today we would like to start with the tradition of libations. Libations is an African-American tradition dating back to the motherland, Africa. It is a time where we connect, where we draw our minds in together, and we focus ourselves, connecting ourselves in the tradition with the spirits of our ancestors. So today we would like to start this time of reflection and discussion with a libation in honor of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And when I say the certain libation, you respond by saying Ashe, which is the equivalent of it is so, or you agree. We pour this libation today as we bring our minds in and focus on the many trials and the many tribulations that our ancestors have endured and triumphed through. And we say Ashe. Ashe. Today we pour this libation in honor of those who sacrificed, who risked their lives to break barriers so that we can stand here free, moving towards freedom and liberty and justice for all. We say Ashe. Today we specifically pour this libation as we come together in honor of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King to think about and ponder on his legacy and in extending it to this next generation. And we say Ashe,
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 Ashe.
Ashe.
Thank you. Again, I would like to welcome you to the State of the African American Community Address and in-service. I would ask you to hug and touch your neighbor, but in this season, it's not quite possible. So I'm going to just ask you to just take a moment and hug yourself while looking at your neighbor and sharing that energy. Come on, give yourself a good hug. Come on, love on yourself and share a smile under your mask. Lift up your eyebrows, if you will. It is our hope today that through these conversations and discussions that we perform sort of what we have heard Dr. Eric Dyson say, exorcism of our racial demons with the grammar of agitation. Today we have come to address just one of the perennial problems, the divisive and oppressive forces of white dominance that eats away at the Black existence and creates the internal tensions that separate us as African Americans from one another. Black folks have come in every variety of belief, ideology, and politics. So Black communities are heterogeneous, they are differentiated, they are complicated and nuanced. Yet they are laced together by a thread of a common history, a common oppression, and a common victimhood of cultural and ethnic cleansing that continues to reimagine itself in the Western world and places around the world that still experience the evolution of white dominance. The circumstances of Black life compose the blues. The conditions of Black life create its artists. The constraints of Black life shape its forms. And the content of Black life supplies its theme and its visions. While African Americans have internally divided ourselves by shades of skin and pocketbook, racism impose a lovely and efficient unity on Black life. A practical solidarity. According to Dr. Dyson, whether we are doctors or ditch diggers, lawyers or landscapers, architects, automobile mechanics or accountants, carpenters or chemists or nurses or nannies, farmers or pharmacists, secretaries or social workers, judges or prisoners. We are all colored in the eyes of many. And we just don't count in much. I distinctly say their world, referring to a group and a segment of our European American counterparts, because our European American counterparts, they are not a monolith either. And it's important to understand that even though some paradigms disagree, not all whites are racist. The addiction to the pornography of prosperity has unfortunately granted the warranty of oppression in this age. Ebonics, witty articulations predicated upon pigmented linguistic and verbal invention, the bristling integrity of street speech is consistently under attack. In each language is a history of the past, a worldview and a value. When one attacks Afro speech, the language, they attack the very essence of who we are, our God, our family, our religion, our religious approach, our values, our happiness, our aspiration, our future, our posterity. I submit that it is not only time for white supremacy to be assaulted, it is not only time for dominant white supremacist ideology to be attacked, it is also time for black folks to look inward and understand the resources at our disposal. And in connection with one another, with people who have joined the movement of all races and ethnicities, to create a community that is diverse in nature, equitable in culture, inclusive in its values, and belonging in its essence. We must bear in mind that our culture, our community, our values are not the evolution of happenstance. The current racist-induced culture is the result of intentional seeds of hate that have been nurtured and cultivated for the last 400 years. Thus, changing the culture is going to be a long journey of undoing and deconstructing values of hate that rest above and beneath the surface, in the fore and in the back, implicitly and explicitly speaking to us every day in every way possible. In order for this change, it is going to take like-minded human lovers working together to primarily advance people and not a particular ideology concerning people and how they should supposedly exist in this world. This will not be easy, because creating an inclusive world where everyone belongs will not be simple. But it means that you have got to help. And when you help, you help everyone. The people you love, the people you like, the people you agree with, and the people you don't like so much and don't agree with. And you know this: when you help them, you help yourself. And when you help yourself, you help them, you help our community get better. We have got to do away with this narcissistic individualism, with the meism, the myopic concentration on self. This rhetorical exclamation of supposed experiments, expertisms on every subject matter known as Western dominance. In reality, these are tautological in nature, both hegemonic and anti-hegemonic in nature, both liberating and binding. We have to embrace that old school black culture that says, if you like it, I love it. Black folks have been through too much to be divided. We have been through too much to be caught in the crossfire of the arguments of power hoarders. Personally, my focus is no longer me, myself, and I. It's we, us, and our. Amen. Because when I see the collective unit, when I see our shared humanity, the community, I honor you because I want to be honored. I respect because I want to be respected. I don't judge because I don't want to be judged. And we must resist being held hostage by someone else's narrative and embrace a beautiful and free and bright future where people are just like folk, honored and respected for their truth, with an understanding that the individual truth binds the collective truth. And that is what makes a liberated society dynamic. It is not clean cut, it is convoluted at times, but it's beautiful. It's free and it's exhilarating. No matter what your tradition, no matter what your orientation, no matter what your faith tradition, no matter what your ethnicity, you are a human being. Atomistic, me-accused capitalism and personal idealism must yield to the greater good of being a part of something bigger and better than an individual itself. In the process, we are also affirmed individually, and embracing these vistas of possibilities opens a new horizon that reflects Dr. King's vision to be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope, to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood, to be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free, liberated one day. To be able to sing with new meaning, my country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring.
Good morning. The State of the African American Community Address is designed to educate the broader community regarding the progress of the African American community in regard to specific indicators or identified initiatives. This year, the State of the African American Community theme is 55 Shades of Black. The address is designed to specifically address the very pervasive ways that African Americans and those of the diaspora experience erasure and ethnic cleansing via white space and white dominance. Today, we look at and examine how the system itself demands African Americans to not only disconnect from each other, but from themselves. The goal of the address is to highlight these opportunities for cultural advancement, empower African Americans and those of the diaspora to build their resilience, resist the forces of ethnic cleansing, and to support allies as they partner with us to build a system that is belonging and inclusive. Mahar and Tetrat proposed that the next frontier in this journey is to uncover and elaborate on ongoing operations of privilege. In this instance, white space is spoken of in terms of the dispensation to defend excellence and acceptable innovation. The aforementioned excellence within the confines of social justice culture has a tendency to be associated with whiteness, maleness, heterosexuality, and social class advantage, AKA white space. We can now add femaleness, that is, white middle class femaleness, to that list of dominating cultural forces. The cultural values associated with the statuses previously mentioned create silent laws that work for and against specific groups of people in the social and political context. Hegemony is the enemy of diversity, equity, and inclusion. When access to social and cultural products that are consistent with your interest and upbringing are denied. It is the implication of privilege for some and disadvantage for others. It is a sure indicator that somehow hegemony is at work, especially when the availability of diverse, especially positive representations of members of your group in the media are not available. When the African American community is forced to acquiesce to middle-class white standards in language, in priorities, in behavior, in values, in operations, in communication, etc., we experienced a forced assimilation. This assimilation is a survival mechanism for most Black folks. The lack of diverse representation and access to social and cultural products in the public sphere represents the clear manifestation of white space and the ways and means by which white space is reinforced. White dominance is perpetuated and classical racism is operationalized in our modern era. Dr. Johnson outlines 5 personas of African Americans. 1, hyper-assimilation. Assimilation, mid-assimilation, mid-resistance. Resistance and hyper-resistance. Hyper-assimilation is described as an intentional formation to Europeanism by African Americans based on the thought of Afrocentric behavior being associated with a lower class, ignorance, or infidelity. Assimilation is described as a transition to a European cultural base due to either the process of time, community circumstances in which one was raised, or being born to families who have hyper-assimilated parents or grandparents. It should be noted that in some cases, assimilation has been and can be a coping mechanism. For oftentimes, in the midst of white-dominated society, African Americans are rewarded for being Eurocentric in career, in society, and in association, to the extent that some see blending in with white culture as a way to protect themselves from the aggression of white supremacy. Mid-assimilation, mid-resistance is described as an extreme complexity of life views informing one's cultural base that includes varying levels of diverse combinations of Europeanism and Afrocentrism. Resistance is described as a life view and experience informing the cultural base that situates itself in the evolution of African slaves post-slavery. Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and the Great Depression. Hyper-resistance is described as a cultural base with the intentional construction of self to avoid any resemblance of European influence. Resistance, or hyper-resistance for that matter, can be defined as sustaining and revitalizing that which has over the centuries sustained as communities of color struggling to make it, to resist, revitalize, and reimagine. These definitions gives us insight into what we see as the survival of African Americans due to systemic racism and structural oppression. One common behavior among African Americans is code switching. The code switching in language, execution, and overall culture is necessary for leaders to navigate the system and survive in general. This is different from being bilingual. This system has demonized and criminalized everything associated with Blackness to the extent that many African Americans have to disconnect totally from their ancestry simply to exist. Parents are afraid to name their children names associated with Black culture because they are afraid of how they will be treated in school. At birth, African American parents juggle with the idea of, if I give my child this name, will they be able to get a job? Job applicants have been known not to be considered from employers just by them looking at the name and assuming they are African Americans. Educated career folks are forced to disown their family because colleagues question their character for being associated with someone from the hood. Students believe that talking Black is ignorant and talking white is educated. Permed hair, malnutrition bodies, mentally stressed adults, and the list goes on, all connected to the system's 422-year war on Blackness. African American leaders today have to prepare to manage the expectations of the white-based system in order to be successful. Managing whiteness and its expectations is literally a skill set an African American has to learn in order to survive.
Hey everybody, I'm J.R. Reynolds. I gotta say, I was really nervous when I was asked to do this. I'm going to do a breakout session. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going to be in my breakout session. But I was really nervous because of the size of the Kellogg Arena. I mean, looking at all these bleachers and everything, it just made me really intimidated. But when I came in and I saw that the crowd was going to be smaller, I breathed a sigh of relief. Except that when there's a smaller crowd, that means you can see every single eyeball that's looking at you. So I am back to being as nervous as I was when I first walked in here. Anyway, about my session. The presentation is about Black people for Black people. Anybody can join it and be a part of it, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that it's going to be about Black folks, and I'm going to be presenting it. What it does is frames the issue of identity from an historical racial inequity perspective. It celebrates the rich and diverse identities that we all hold. It also shares some of the origins of why we are the way we are, why we do the things we do, why we think the way we do, and why we act the way that we do. It also examines some of the false information and stereotypic narratives about who we are, some of which we also internalize in ourselves. Then I'll also be sharing the effects of current and historical generation fake news that's been perpetrated on Black folks by the greater community and by ourselves. And then lastly, what I'm going to do is provide some concrete pathways for us to move forward. So I hope you can, if you want to come up to my section, I think it's section 103 when the time comes. Thank you.
Good morning. I wish getting ready for the day were as easy as putting on one pant leg at a time. For many of us, getting dressed is a process of deculturing. We have to dress and undress our language, our hairstyles, our mannerisms, wardrobe, and our attitudes. This stripping of the authentic self triggers the pain of historical dehumanization, daily micro and macroaggressions, stereotypes, discrimination, marginalization, historical and ongoing oppression. Driving while Black, more like breathing while Black. So of course, Black people live and cope in psychological self-protection. I'll give you a quick neurobiology lesson. When the brain is in self-protection, it is driven by fear and threat. And so you all have heard of the famous fight, flight, or freeze response. It's the brain's way of saying you're about to be eaten by a lion. And racism for us is the lion. And when we are driven by fear and threat, the frontal lobes shut down and we are only able to process the means to survive, essentially impairing our ability to learn, live, and love. Functions that are necessary for a thriving human experience. Then to add insult to injury, our trauma responses, or how we cope with a perceived threat, are wrongfully stereotyped as the angry Black woman, the go along to get along Sambo, or the violent savage. And nevertheless, look at us, existing, showing up in spite of our transgressions. My dad used to say, if you see me in a fight with a bear, help the bear. We make pain look good, and perhaps maybe too good. So much that we have learned to mask our wounds. Black people, our experiences, and how we've shown up in them both deserve a round of applause and an intervention. Depression, anxiety, other mood disorders, racialized PTSD, suicide attempts rising among Black youth, and substance abuse. According to the census and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, over 7 million African Americans reported having a mental illness in the past year. And that's what's reported. We could assume there are many of us, right, who have also struggled with mental illness, who have not told anybody. That is more people than the populations of Chicago, Houston, and Philadelphia combined. We don't need therapy because we're broken. We deserve therapy so that we can heal.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, Mr. Reynolds, and Mrs. Wallace. At this time, we're going to get ready to start the day of discussions. Following these introductory comments, we're going to have 2 panel discussions. And the first panel discussion will be, well, I won't introduce that. Ms. Kyra's going to introduce that. And so we're going to have 2 panel discussions. One's going to be talking about the internal struggles that happen amongst the African American community. And the second panel discussion is going to be talking about how we can build more effective and relationship-based cultures. So at this time, we're going to invite our first set of panelists to the stage. We're going to clean our mics, and we're going to get right into the discussion. How about it?
Testing. Can you hear me? Testing, okay. So as Dr. Johnson was stating, this is our first panel, and the first panel discussion is a conversation about how we can collectively advocate for the honor of the diversity of the African American diaspora, the African diaspora, and bridge the identity gap. I'm going to start off by just allowing the panelists to just state their names before we get started.
Yes, my name is Damian Brown from the RISE organization.
Hi, I'm Janasia Morris, Ward 2 City Commissioner.
Hi, I'm Cassandra Portis from the Southwestern Michigan Urban League.
J.R. Reynolds from Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation.
Dr. Alicia Johnson, where?
Now, before we get started, let me go over what our expected outcomes are for this first panel. First, a deeper understanding of how Black manifests itself among the diaspora. Secondly, a deeper empathy among Blacks regarding each other's lived experiences. And then lastly, a greater acceptance of Blacks by other Blacks, honoring the different ways Blacks manifest itself. So let's dive right in. and anyone can feel free to answer the question after it's been asked. In hearing the spectrum of African American personas, how did you feel in hearing groupings of personas identified or defined?
I thought it was spot on. I thought it was spot on in describing the different ways that we're viewed. And I feel like a lot of us feel stuck to those.
I agree.
It's just low, we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry. So I agree about the feeling stuck part. Once I looked at the categories, I felt like they represented boxes. And so many times as African Americans, we have to check a box. So I felt like that was just another box that we have to make ourselves fit within.
I would say that I felt conflicted. So a sense of pride that we're able to flex and pivot and shift when we need to shift in spaces, but also sad that we have to show up differently in order to be embraced by the world. And then, I felt a little challenged by the framing in a way. I think sometimes we assume, when we use language like Europeanism, we sometimes assume, and it exists, so I'm not saying that, but I think that we assume that all Black folks have the same sort of lived experiences, and that we're a homogenous group of people. And there are some folks who have very natural European life experiences, what we're calling Europeanism. And so how do we also allow or embrace those Black folks as well, right? They're not necessarily, it may not feel like assimilation to them because they're just naturally being who they are. And so how do we as Black folks also embrace our own definitions of Blackness?
Okay, so within that, who would want to mention where you feel you fall within those defined spectrums?
Well, I can kind of relate to the part where how you fit in, being the only girl of 6 boys who did not look like me. And when I say that, as far as that is complexion-wise. So when we were little kids, I looked like my father. We had the same father. But I was the light skin and the runt, the little bitty person, right? And my brothers are all tall, dark, and they are handsome, okay? And so my brothers and my cousins would kind of tease me about that. I was half-baked and all that kind of stuff, and as a little girl, being a light-skinned little girl, and those of you who grew up with me knew that my hair was like almost Lucy Red. I did have a complex because being in school and stuff like that, the kids called me Redhead Lucy, and I was half-baked and stuff like that. So, kind of growing up as a little kid, I had a complex, but thanks to my mother, that she helped me to identify who I was and be able to accept who I was.
I would say I fall into the category of mid-resistance, mid-assimilation. I think that I can place myself in that category based on what Dr. Johnson said, lived experiences. Sometimes we perceive that all Black people have the same lived experience, but that's not true. And when I went to Michigan State, people would sometimes tell me, "You act white." And then coming from Central, I never ever got that. So going to a predominantly white institution, being surrounded by people who looked like me, but they weren't from here. They hadn't had the same experiences that I had. So the way that I acted reminded them of the white people that they had seen. Whereas coming from here, there was nobody that could tell me that I wasn't Black.
So for me, I would say that I have largely assimilated, but in recent years, the last couple of decades, I've actively resisted that. But when I was a kid, it wasn't beaten into me, but I was corrected at every turn. I grew up in Ohio in the suburbs, but it was a black suburbs, and the folks that lived there were primarily, I would say, back in the day, it felt like we were all just like living normal lives, but as I look back on it now, we were lower depressed income neighborhoods, and I was ostracized for the way that I would speak, the things that I would talk about. Like, I'm into the stars and astronomy. I love to swim. I love Hellman's mayonnaise. I used to get persecuted by folks in my neighborhood because of the things that I liked, the way that I talked. But I have to say that it served me well once I started my career. At the same time, I was still black. And so I would always run into those barriers. But I achieved more than some, less than others. But there's a definite price to pay for the assimilation process. And in many respects, I'm paying it now.
Yeah, for me, it's the hyper resistance, and for me, I believe it's on a couple different layers in regards to overall. I feel like a lot of men like myself that grew up in the hood, grew up and come from humble beginnings is what I call it. Our passion for life is a lot of times mistaken as being aggressive or overly aggressive. A lot of times, even within our own culture, I identify with this young lady here in regards to being light-skinned. Like, I feel like I had to go extra hard because I was light-skinned, because I feel like light skin is soft and different things like that, especially in the hood. And so I feel like I had to again be hyper resistant, from that standpoint, to prove that I wasn't, this way. So.
Good. I'm going to take a quick moment to allow our new panelist to just go ahead and introduce himself.
Yeah, right on time. My name's Arturo Puckering. I'm with NIBC. I would jump right in and say it's kind of more mid-assimilation for me based on, again, lived experiences. Being first generation American, but also Afro-Latino, because my mother is from Panama, my father was from Barbados. So, before my parents got into the military, and, that would, of course, then go on to affect my lived experiences. Living in East New York and Brooklyn, there was a very, very different cultural divide when it came to your Caribbean migrants, if you will, versus your African Americans that were in New York. There were a lot of different ideas, a lot of different challenges, a lot of different conversations I overheard as a kid, through school, through churches, a lot of different challenges, grudges, if you will, between neighborhoods that I actually didn't really understand until years later. Different stereotypes that, maybe certain family members I had that were from Barbados or from Jamaica may have had about African Americans in New York and vice versa. And as I continued to grow, I would always spend every summer in Panama. I would go to Panama, a totally different cultural, condition there. There was literally no racism. You literally saw everybody together. Things were a little bit different when it came to class. And as I got into about third grade or so, my parents got into the military. From then on, I kind of lived on military bases. Every 3 or 4 years, we moved. And in some ways, I almost kind of not really reinvented myself, but there was always an opportunity to approach things on a socially novel level, if you will. And from living in Colorado, living in Virginia, to hearing the N-word, to living in San Antonio, seeing things in so many different ways in this very same country, and understanding how I didn't necessarily have to internalize anything, because I always had comfort in the reality that we moved, and that I had an understanding that there was different perspectives and different approaches in other parts of the country. I was also able to have the empathetic consideration to understand that a lot of my family's friends and black neighbors didn't have that experience. And it went on to affect a lot of things I would hear in music, things I would see in pop culture. Going into college, going into Los Angeles, it went on to really encompass not only the way I approach life, but the way I approach my profession. It's one of the biggest reasons I'm in public service today, to bring forward that solution, that balance, that understanding that I was able to have at an early age, because I was able to move, go to different countries, see Black people in different environments, different cities, different states, and understand that while the challenges were similar, they were very, very different.
I would say I am between resistance and mid-assimilation and mid-resistance. I would say I am masterful at code switching. I have learned the ability to know when and how I need to show up differently, but also you will know that I'm Black, right? Kyra and I were joking earlier, when we're talking, right, amongst each other, we're snatching stuff out the air and using our hands, and right? And I have learned to be okay with showing up that way in spaces where it's predominantly white, and can be okay with that, but also know that there's a delicate balance, right, that we need to survive. So, yeah.
Great. So a couple of the next questions were already answered throughout your responses, but I'm just going to read them. How has your persona impacted your lived experience? I think we heard that a lot through your responses. And how has your persona impacted your engagement with other African Americans? A lot of you spoke about, okay, so when I was talking to this person, then they were asking these questions or saying, well, why are you like this? So we heard some of those responses as well. If any of you feel like you want to add something else to either of those questions, feel free. Going once? Okay, so moving to the next question then. As far as your identity and persona is concerned, what were your expectations, implied or explicit, from other African Americans?
Well, growing up, and I grew up in this community, so I was always kind of really like smart. And growing up as a child, in school, there were kids who, and one of them turned out to be one of my very best friends to this day. But I could remember her always saying, "You're just a smarty pants. You think you know everything." And it wasn't that. I actually was reading and actually going after information. So it wasn't something that I did not know, but I guess I showed up that way to them. And I'm able to teach kids, which I work with all the time, show up as your authentic self. Be you. Be who you are. Don't dummy down because you are intelligent. Be intelligent.
I think our expectations come from our experiences. And because of my experiences, I have different expectations for Black people. When I see them, I don't think that we have to fit into one box or look like each other or act like each other. Because of the different people that I've been around, I understand that we can come in many different shapes or forms. So I'm more accepting and not surprised to see alternative lifestyles within Black people.
Some of it, I also think maybe generational. And I think this is where we may have learned the survival technique of assimilation, because your elders will get you together, right? If you don't show up with tact, right, and professionalism. And so I think expectations are changing because we're getting better, right, at equity. And I understand the expectation, right, that you need to show up a little more assimilated in somebody, right? So I do think that sometimes it has a generational context.
I would like to add that, one thing I've definitely noticed is changes in the media. Life always imitates art. I think one of the biggest and most fundamental things you can look at is if you look through our children's eyes. I have kids, 2 daughters in middle school, I have 2 sons in elementary school, and one thing I always notice when they're watching TV, watching any of these TV shows, even on Netflix, is the commercials. You see casting that's always relatively diverse. It's been that way since I was a kid, but now you're seeing things apply in characters. You're seeing, things redone, everything from the Wonder Years to superhero movies, and it's putting things into the perspective that we can engage that really wasn't there maybe 30 years ago. I think we're even on the cusp of having Idris Elba as the new James Bond, right? But truly, what it really encompasses is changing ideals that are progressively bringing us all closer together. When you're able to objectify something, especially in media, especially in film and television, like we've been seeing so much in these last 5 years, our kids grow up with that, and they don't have those same conceptions about race, and they almost grow into beginning to minimize it, or they develop a cynical attitude towards it, which is the first step beyond a defense mechanism. It means that we are starting to deal with a generation that is looking, seeing, and understanding things without those same stigmas that we may have even seen just 10, 15 years ago, and I'm excited.
So to add on to what they were saying about generational, I think that I can speak to this a little bit because I was in high school 5 years ago. So seeing the representation of people who look like me in roles of leadership or roles of power, or seeing people who look like me on TV lets me know that I can do that. So we have to actively work to let people know that they can be in these roles, and not just a certain type of person can be in this role. That's why I'm very intentional about what I do. I know, for example, today I put on jeans. I did that on purpose because I'm 22 years old and most 22-year-olds wear jeans. I want them to know that you can be up here. We don't have to put ourselves into a box and be professional and make ourselves look the way that they want us to look. We have to meet people where they're at. And so I'm trying to show people that I'm meeting them where they're at.
And I second that right there, and I'm real big on when I talk to youth and even individuals that I feel come from my walk of life, like what I'm doing with my nonprofit. I want to be an example, to show that you can come from this walk of life. I did 12 years in prison, go through these things and come back, change your life, and then help change your community. You don't have to stay stuck in these roles right here. I preach that to the kids all the time. You know what I mean? You can, create your own identity. You don't have to stay stuck in these boxes.
With me, I could be both their parents because I'm of that age. And I am very authentic with all kids, all languages, all barriers. I meet them where they are, and I show up in a way that they can be authentic with me. They can be real with me. We have fun. I don't know a kid that I have met or interacted with that the outcome is we're just able to dialogue and all of that. So for me, it's not a generational thing. I want people and our kids and our generation to understand that we are all human and we all have something to add to the table. So I put myself in the box to learn from them. She can tell you, Damon might be able to tell you, but that's just me. I want to be in that area where they can be authentic, and I can be authentic, and they can learn from me, and I can learn from them.
Tattooed hands. You can still get out there and help with tattooed hands.
Speaking from the person with the tattooed hand.
Yeah.
So what would you say are the opportunities for cultural growth and community advancement that you perceive coming from this discussion?
I think we need to meet people where they're at, like I said, and just be more accepting of each other. Sometimes even us as Black people look at other Black people and judge them based on what the lifestyle that they're living is. And in judgment, we sometimes overlook the great ideas and opportunities that they could bring to the table. So we have to stop looking at people based on where they come from and think about, we all came from somewhere. Like, most of us are from the hood. Most of us came from experiences that are less than desirable. But look at us, we are changing lives, we are representing our people, and who's to say that somebody else can't do that? We can't just judge people based on where they come from, and I think that's what we need to work on as a whole.
I can stick with our theme from the Urban League, changing people, communities. One person, one community at a time, but living and being that example that shows them that we can show up as our authentic selves and be ourselves. And the cultures, you can learn from every culture. It is so diverse, and I mean, when I look out now with the young people and the people that I've been in communion with, it's so rich to be able to be that culture that we had growing up here in Battle Creek. So that's what I look at. I look at the richness and everything that I was given growing up, and that's what I want to reinvent.
So speaking for myself, I have an extraordinary amount of compassion for folks who are different from me. And I think the reason is because when I was growing up, I didn't get a lot of compassion because I was the one that was different. In looking, I've done some studies. I'm no expert in African Americanology, but I do have experience, just my lived experience in observing people and moving with people. And from that, I've learned that everybody has baggage that they're carrying with them. And everybody has an abundance of resources within themselves that they can use in order to succeed in life, whatever succeed in life means for them. The challenge is that folks don't know that that's within them, and I see it as my job to help those people of all colors, all races, to look at who they are and mine the incredible resources that are internalized within them and bring them outward. And that's especially true for the African American community because we've been so stifled and oppressed and put in boxes that have limited our capacity to be a success. I'm starting to get angry about it because I do racial equity training for Living Anti-Oppression, and so things are being conjured as I'm talking. But I try really, really hard to be as compassionate as possible with the people that I encounter. I don't always measure up to my to what I state that is my goal and my objective. But I try to be as mindful as possible as I interact with different folks as I encounter them.
I think sometimes when we talk about equity and inclusion, we make it really, we make it really complex and complicated. And really, equity and inclusion is about relationships, right? Building better, meaningful, and compassionate relationships with one another. And so once we get to that place and we understand that I want to develop a relationship with you, I begin to be curious about who you are. I want to embrace your differences. I want to reject sameness, right? I want to embrace that. And so I think when we get to the place of embracing difference and building relationships with people, then we're on the right track.
I do think that that where there's crisis, there's opportunity. And what I will say is that this has been the start of quite an interesting decade, a decade of really significant change. Literally everything post-pandemic is the real world. We have changed the way we have done so much when it comes to work, when it comes to opportunity, when it comes to communication. We have seen doors open with a plethora of different resources and initiatives and ideas and platforms to bring us closer together, to heal, to resolve, both socioeconomically and physically as a nation and as a world from this pandemic. And in doing so, our work continues to bring us closer together. That's where a lot of this launch with diversity and inclusion and equity has come from the administrative levels all the way down. We have seen a year for the ages in 2020. I don't think I've seen a year of such progress when it comes to civil rights since 1992. And it's having conversations like this that give us the opportunity to provide that objective platform. We're almost dead to rights. We've almost hit the wall to where we're all aware of what needs to be done, and the chips have now fallen. And a big part of the pandemic has actually given us the time, opportunity, and resources to focus on those that are even more disadvantaged than us. Give us the opportunity to bounce back together. And in doing so, we're working together and talking together more than we ever have before. Even if it isn't Zoom screens sometimes, and you hear the occasional dog barking or a 3-year-old going on 35 running across the living room. But it's an interesting time we're in.
I'm very hopeful for our youth and what's to come with our youth. I feel like that we're laying the foundation. We're breaking a lot of barriers. I look at individuals like Commissioner Morris and what she's doing in her mindset, and it's refreshing. And again, I try to steal these same things in my kids. That's why I have them here today, to be able to again pass that torch. We talk about relationships. I feel like that our youth don't see color and the different barriers the way that we've grown up with, the way we see them. Technology is, taking off. And so, again, I'm very hopeful for our youth. And, we look at the next 10 years, 20 years from now, I think it's going to be great.
Thank you all so much. Can you all join me by clapping and thanking our panelists for this first panel discussion? Great job. We're going to move right into our second panel discussion. So those of you who are on the second panel, if you can make your way up here, we will wipe down all the mics before we pass them on, and we'll continue our program. So what I'm going to start off with is allowing our panelists to simply introduce themselves before I begin asking questions.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Holly with the Sojourner Truth Center for Liberation and Justice.
Good morning. My name is Kerry Whitfield, and I'm with the NAACP of Battle Creek.
Hey everyone, I'm Justin Andertz. Wear a couple different hats in the community, a local entrepreneur coach, and manage the Color the Creek mural initiative, and I'm very honored to be here today.
Good morning, everyone. Lynn Ward Gray, former city commissioner, also with the Battle Creek Community Foundation.
I'm Talia Champlin with Remax Parrott Associates.
Good morning, my name is Kathy Antea. I'm with the NAACP as well as Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, and I am very pleased and honored to be here today. Thank you.
Now, calling people in, not out. Every day we are bombarded and held hostage by the baggage of our transactional culture. We are consistently calling people out on what the boxes have to say. These boxes are predetermined rules to engagement that oftentimes do not respond to or represent the everyday individual or our own individual journeys and personal truths. All white girl tears are not the same. Likewise, all strong black men are not are not supportive of oppressive patriarchy. Not all evangelicals are racist. The list could go on. Transactional culture prevents us from seeing one another's humanity and acknowledging our individual story. Now, in this conversation, we envision our outcomes to be: 1, understanding the distinction between a transactional-based culture and a relationship-based culture. 2, the realization of the dynamic possibilities of a relationship-based culture. And 3rd, a sense of liberation to explore relationship-based cultural approaches. You guys ready? Again, as with the first panel, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just jump in to answer the question, and I'm kind of looking, so I'm just acknowledging. Question number 1, what does it mean to have a transactional-based culture? What does it mean to you to have a transactional-based culture?
Good morning. I'll attempt to answer that first. A transactional-based culture is centered around not developing a relationship with one, but merely resolving concerns, issues, and problems with another. An example would be, if, for instance, I work in engineering for all practical and simple purposes, and I have someone to come to me regarding a project, I have no interest in that person's life. I am interested in the project. So our relationship does not go anywhere, but in fact, our responsibilities does. Transactional simply means that there is a transaction. And as a result, the transactional relationship deals directly with the task at hand rather than the personal relationship that can be developed if it was something different.
Yeah, I would. That was really great, and I would really. The only thing I would add to that is just that in the transactional culture, you're really looking at an expectation and an exchange, and so there's always going to be something where, you know, if you call a plumber and they fix the thing, you're going to pay them the bill for that service, and so what you'd be looking for in more of a relational culture is really trying to be able to find value in the human and not in just in that exchange and in that expectation that you had predetermined.
So you moved right into the second question, which is, what does it mean to have a relationship-based culture? Did anybody want to add to that piece? Relationship-based culture.
I think actually on the previous panel, Dr. Johnson's statement about relationships was spot on. I think a relationship culture requires more effort and more time and a risk of being vulnerable in order to build trust and form a relationship where you have accountability. So it's a much more involved and intentional effort. And I would just add on to the transactional piece and go a little shadier than my colleagues. But oftentimes, you may find people that are more transactional based are looking to find out what can I get from this person? What kind of connections do they have that I can get? Many times, you know, I like people, and when I meet cool people, I just want to hang out with them. So I might invite someone to lunch or dinner, and I can tell they're waiting for me to ask something of them, to serve on a committee or to introduce them to someone else, and I'm not. And I can see the relief by the time we get to the end of our time together, and it's like, I just want to know who you are. I think you're a cool person. I just want to vibe with you. I think that's a big difference.
Yeah, I would just add that we, you know, everyone has talents and superpowers and things that they can help other people with, and so really holding value in yourself, I think, is a big piece of a relationship culture, because if you are able to value what you can bring to the world, then you can probably also see what other people bring to the world.
So in those responses, I think we gathered the premise about the conversation that relationship-based culture approaches are a bit healthier than transactionals. However, are there times when we need transactional-based relationships?
I think that even our relationships, our interactive relationships, as these panelists down here were describing them, involve transactions. Makes me feel really awkward to say this, and I feel like I'm disagreeing, and yet, as Kimberly was stating, as she said, when I meet someone and I think, oh, they're cool, I really want to kind of hang with them and see what's going on and hear what their life is about, I want to build a relationship, and hello, I'm looking for something from that person. I'm looking for their worldviews, their heart thoughts, their ideas. And while I may not have any overt requirements or asks of them, I certainly have in my heart a need to find out more about them. So when I analyze transactional versus relationship-based cultures, I can't help but think, wow, maybe I'm guilty of high expectations of everyone all the time, and I need to pay attention to that. Thank you.
You know, if I can just add to that a little bit, I'm coming from a somewhat science-based background. Transactional relationships are very good for its purpose. You tend to get things done. I'm not interested in the person, I'm interested in the activity. What is it that we have to have done? How should we go about doing it? I don't need to know who you are, who your mother is. I don't want to know all of these things. I simply need to understand what the task is and how to go about doing it. And it's very efficient. It saves a great deal of time, it saves a great deal of energy, and it protects your privacy. So for me, in a lot of cases, it actually can be a good activity. Some people are introverted and some people are extroverted. You'll probably find those that are extroverted more interested in not a transactional, but a relationship type culture. But those that are introverted, you'll probably find that they'll prefer just taking care of the need at the time in which it exists.
I have I've given this a lot of thought, so Dr. Ali, thank you for allowing me to be up here because it makes me think. White people, not all of them, don't want to be racist here, but more than think they do, including me, do have to be relational, because why wouldn't a Black person need some trust to be built when we make it so hard at every turn? When you have to walk into the door and wonder if you're even welcome there, when you have to walk in, when you have to wonder if you're being judged because you said ax instead of ask, which everybody knows that ax and ask mean the same thing. Where's the judgment? Well, why would you even judge? So, but white people we grew up in an anti-Black world, and even when we want desperately to do better, we still do a shitty job. Oh, sorry. We still do a terrible job sometimes.
Go ahead, be so.
And you started this, well, he brought his daughters. Girls, don't talk like that. Your dad raised you better. But Kyra, you started out by saying call out or call in rather than call out. I'm sorry. If Shawnette Spicer hadn't been strong enough to call me out, I may not have learned the lessons. And so yes, sometimes you just need the plumber. But I would say that white people need to be more relational because we don't deserve your trust until we earn it. I know you're not clapping because I said the S word.
She said the S word.
So that brings the next question to the forefront. Why are relationship-based cultural approaches so difficult in the public square?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about how transactional culture is a symptom of capitalist society and white supremacy, and so this idea of no one, we have to work all these hours, and who has time and energy to kind of tackle societal issues when they're just trying to, put food on the table and working, as hard as they can to just kind of make ends meet. And so I do think that's a big thing to think about in this idea that, we're programmed to think transactionally. I think that, the humans by nature want to connect. Our hearts, are seeking connection, seeking approval, wanting to be friends and family with everyone, and having healthy communities. I think that's all deeply ingrained in us, but there's this programming that happens that we're all a part of this day-to-day grind that everyone has to, spend so much of their time and energy just kind of doing the basic tasks of life that it really leaves a lot of things that need to be fixed in our society. People don't have the time and energy to really approach those things.
Yeah, I was thinking about, these are all great questions. To follow up on that, I think one of the previous panels might have mentioned that it's harder, I think it was Dr. Johnson, to do this kind of relationship building. And when I think about, us talking about relationships, I think you have to be receptive first to the fact that my lived experiences are real, that you can see me for who I am, my authentic self. And, it's really important for you to be receptive to the fact that there are the reality, the truths of a thing. That, what we're experiencing right now, we're here on MLK Day. Around the country, the King family has asked for us to really focus on, voting rights and fighting for voting rights, something that was very important to Dr. King. And to deny that, what's happening before our own eyes, that, that there's voting laws that are being repressed and things that are happening in states across the country. This is the day to call that out and be receptive to the truth of what's happening in front of us. So it's hard to be in relationship with someone when you're not being receptive to the truths that are happening around us. The very fact that there's been debate about, the Civil War, or that Tulsa even happened, or that, slavery was a real thing. I mean, I remember watching a movie with Queen Latifah in it, and she said to her daughter something about, yeah, the mice in the trap have plenty of cheese, but believe me, they aren't happy, And so the fact that we're up here talking about, that there was just a bunch of tourists on January 6th. You got to be receptive at the Capitol. You got to be receptive that these things did happen, that people did pass away because they were guarding our capital, and that, you know, some people had reaction to that event later on and took their own life. So we have to be receptive to the facts that are true, because it's hard to be in a relationship with someone when you can't accept the facts that are before us.
Do you mind if I build on that? Yesterday, Pastor Monique French at Washington Heights Community Methodist preached to us that we need to discover, learn, understand, and then apply. And I think I'm going to speak as a white person, not representing all white people, but saying that sometimes we might respect some things or your lived experience. Sometimes we might understand it, but we need to be influenced by what we're told, and then we need to apply. We need to do better.
And actually, that was leading right into the next question on how can we solve for the difficulty of relationship-based cultural approaches in our public spaces, and we're talking in literal terms. How can we solve for this difficulty?
Well, you know, what came to mind for me on this question was we always talk about intentionality, and I think even before you get to that, you have to do some internal work. A lot of the women on this panel and the men on this panel and those out there have done internal work first. I mean, you have to, you know, again, believe that the 1619 Project was righteous work, and that, you know, it was factual in its account. You have to believe that folks like our speaker today and Dr. Michael Eric Dyson have researched the African diaspora and really identified, you know, that these things exist, and we have to believe that racism exists in itself, and you have to internally learn what you may have missed along the way, or what might have been, you know, left out of the history books. For many of us across the country didn't start learning about some of these things, even our very own Sojourner Truth, until later in life. So I think sometimes that work of being intentional starts internally.
I would echo your statements, Lynn, completely 100%. And I really do think that next step is intention. I know early on, particularly early on in my career, I was in retail marketing, and it was embedded in me, this transactional approach. It wasn't until I started doing community outreach work and community engagement that I was really intentional about relationship building. And it is not easy, but it has to, it's about what you want your experiences to be and how you want to make connections. And it's not always easy, and it's a muscle that you have to continually exercise. I've had some really challenging situations with people whose beliefs were very different from mine, and I had to take a breath and think about trying to understand their perspective and then helping them to understand my perspective, which wasn't easy. I think of two incidents that come to mind were with middle-aged white heterosexual males. And those are really tough conversations. On the inside, my heart is beating, I'm sweating, but I'm holding my own, and we're going back and forth, not in a debate kind of way, but in a conversational way to understand each other's perspectives. And those ended up being some really positive relationships coming out of that experience. So it's not, relationship building is not an easy thing, but it's definitely intentional in terms of how you want to be in relation with others.
And just, excuse me, just to add to that, an example of building those types of relationship-based cultures is something that occurred just this past Saturday. I had a group of Africans from the Congo to meet with some of our city leaders. The purpose of their meeting with these city leaders and people that can help guide and navigate them as they transition into our community was to build exactly what she's saying, a relationship, culture type relationship. I need our community, our major leaders, to see and understand other people from other countries, from a diverse type relationship. I don't want them to just have a transaction. I want them to build a relationship so that we can move across this community without having problems or issues. But the basis was to build, you asked the question, how do we? Was to build a relationship type culture so that we know more and we appreciate more other people and their dynamics, rather than just acknowledging what our expectations are in getting text or task done.
Well, thank you all. I'm glad, Kim, that you brought up that building relationship-based culture is not easy. And I want to add to that, it's time-consuming as well. And I know for a lot of people, that's why it's easier to just deal with transactional relationships or transactions, right? Because you quickly move through it and it's done. You've achieved something, you've accomplished something. Whereas with relationship-based culture, it takes time. It's just like a relationship. It takes time to build it because you're building trust. And whoever the person, whoever the whatever the institution, the organization, is time-consuming. And what came to mind, Lynn, when you spoke about the intentionality was in doing the inner work is we don't know what we don't know, right? Yet it's our responsibility to do what we can to find out, right? It's not incumbent upon somebody else to teach us what we can do our work, because we have to each individually do our own work. So with that, can you all help me thanking this panel for this discussion? Thank you all so much. And we're going to transition into our work sessions. So I'll have Dr. Johnson come back up and give us some directives. And you guys.
Let's give our panelists another round of applause this morning. It's been a very rich discussion. I actually learned a lot. I'm looking forward to going back and doing some work. Before we transition into our breakout, I would like to invite one or two individuals to stand and share a key takeaway from this morning discussion. Is there anyone that would like to share one of your takeaways from this morning discussion? Anybody? Okay, yes. I'll clean the mic and I'll bring it right to you. I got it. Oh, okay.
I think when JR, said to us about developing empathy and his empathy that he has for other people because he felt himself to be an outsider when he was young and then helped to develop his empathies. That struck very deeply at home when I realized, wow, yeah, when I was a kid, I was considered an outsider. I was odd in my mostly white community, and it made me feel very much different and apart. And I would like to think, and with JR's encouragement, I think that's helped me develop a serious empathy elbow or bone or whatever the heck you want to call it, for understanding that no matter what we look like, we all can be outsiders. Thank you.
Is there someone else that would like to share one of their takeaways? We have a hand. Thank you.
To me in particular, because I'm from a Hispanic background, I had a lot of similarities that we go through. For example, we get discriminated for everything because we're still considered Native Americans, but we're not Native because we're across the border. So I resembled a lot with what Arturo said, and a lot of the things that you guys have gone through. So decolonizing, it's one of the things that we struggle with a lot because we're colonized for everything, our religion, everything we're being colonized for. So trying to stay away from the colonization, it's very hard to do things because, as you guys call it, Europeanized, we feel uncomfortable when we have to do certain things because everything's being pointed at us for everything that we do. We can't do certain stuff that typical white people do. I'm not trying to discriminate or sound like I'm discriminating, but our education levels, we can't do a lot of the things, especially because if you're not legalized here, we are caught in a lot of things, no education. Our Native sisters and brothers go through the same thing. We don't have a lot of backgrounds. Some of us come from a poor family or poor backgrounds, and they tell us to go back to our country, which the thing is that we can't because we left there for a purpose, because we wanted to better our education, or our parents wanted to better our education. So I see a lot of the resemblance between African Americans and the Hispanic Latino community, Native Americans. And that's one of the things that I took from here, and I have noticed throughout the time, being 27 and coming to Battle Creek Central and having that background and having the similarities and having friends from different backgrounds has taught me a lot of things in going forward with the kids that I work with. Teaching the Hispanic Latinos not to be colonized to a purpose of, because you're here, you're better than the ones that are coming in. So those are one of the things that I learned from here. Don't discriminate people that are coming in because you were there one time.
Thank you, thank you. Let's give a round of applause to those reflections. Again, I'm just excited. There's been some good learning for me personally. So I'm looking forward to taking a deeper dive. And so we're going to invite you all to the upper bleachers. We have lots of space. That's one of the things we were intentional about this arena, to have space where we can social distance and have some really good dialogue. So we're going to take a deeper dive with 3 different frames. Dr. Johnson is going to be in section 109, up there in the corner. She's going to take a deeper dive with the mental health frame, section 109. Mr. Reynolds will be in section 106, between 106 and 105, taking a deeper dive with the racial equity frame. And Ms. Kyra and myself will be in section 101, taking a deeper dive with the community engagement and leadership frame. Please at this time, go to whichever breakout session you so choose. We'll be in these breakout sessions until 11:50, and then we'll have a break and we'll come down to hear our keynote, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill. If you would like water, there is water for purchase at the Urban League table just across the drape here. Otherwise, the bathrooms are in the hallway, but welcome, let's go and enjoy the conversation, and we'll be back here at 12 o'clock. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get started with this afternoon's events. As many of you know, my name is Kyra Wallace, and I have the privilege of serving as the President and CEO for the Southwestern Michigan Urban League. And we would just like to welcome you today, for those of you who are just coming in for this portion of the day, and thank all of you who are here this morning. For those of you who are here this morning, how did you like the morning events? We had some rich discussion, and we're just really excited about being able to offer our State of the African American Community address each year. And this is actually our 6th year, so each year we continue to refine what's going on and the topics that we cover based on what's happening in our society, and all of it is relevant for the day. And I'm not going to belabor the time. I know we're all excited about our dynamic keynote speaker, which we will get to momentarily, but I'm going to bring up my staffer, Dr. Ellie Johnson, who will introduce our brief entertainment for us so that we can get in the mood to be able to receive our keynote speaker in a few moments. Ellie?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am ecstatic about this afternoon's activities. Before I introduce our keynote, I would like to share a few announcements. In a few moments, we're going to have African drumming and dance performance by a group from Flint, Michigan. And they will be also performing this evening at 6:00 p.m. right here with our local indigenous community. So it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful event at 6:00. It's in partnership with TRHT, and so it's going to be phenomenal. You don't want to miss 6:00 p.m. this evening. Immediately following the keynote address from Dr. Lamont Hill, 2 things will happen. The first thing is we would like to let you all know that we have a wonderful dinner prepared for you all for a nominal fee of $10. You have a choice of either chicken or meatballs with a cabbage and spinach medley, and my brain just left me there. But this is going to be a wonderful meal. And mac and cheese, thank you. And it's for $10, and if you would like to partake immediately following the keynote address, you can just go right through the vendor section and purchase your meal and have your lunch. We would also like to invite you all to support our vendors. We have our Black Expo, which will be taking place from 1 p.m. until 8 p.m. tonight. So please enjoy. There's plenty of space to social distance, but we just want to remind us to be safe by keeping our mask on, as well as maintaining a 6 feet or more social distance. And we have plenty of space for that. So at this time, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. Yes. Exactly, Miss Lynn. All right, so our keynote speaker today is Dr. Lamont Hill. Dr. Mark Lamont Hill is one of the leading intellectual voices in the country. He is currently the host of BET News and a political contributor for CNN. An award-winning journalist, Dr. Hill has received numerous prestigious awards from the National Association of Black Journalists, GLAAD, and the International Academy of Digital Arts and Sciences. Dr. Hill is the Steve Charles Professor of Media, Cities, and Solutions at Temple University. Prior to that, he held positions at Columbia University and Morehouse College. Since his days as a youth in Philadelphia, Dr. Hill has been a social justice activist and organizer. He is a founding board member of My Fifth, a nonprofit organization devoted to educating youth about their legal rights and responsibilities. He is also a board member and organizer of the Philadelphia Student Union. Dr. Hill also worked closely with the ACLU Drug Reform Project, focusing on drug enforcement policies. Over the past few years, he has actively worked on campaigns to end the death penalty and to release numerous political prisoners. Ebony Magazine has named him one of America's 100 most influential Black leaders. Dr. Hill was the author or co-author of 4 books: the award-winning Beats, Rhymes, and Classroom Life, Hip-Hop Pedagogy and the Politics of Identity, The Classroom and the Cell, Conversation on Black Life in America, the New York Times bestseller, Nobody, Casualties of America's War on the Vulnerable, From Ferguson to Flint and Beyond, and Gentrifier. He also has published 2 edited books, Media, Learning, and Sites of Possibility, and Schooling Hip-Hop, New Directions in Hip-Hop-Based Education. Trained as an anthropologist of education, Dr. Hill holds a PhD with distinction from the University of Philadelphia. His research focuses on the intersections between culture, education, and our keynote today, I would like to welcome all the way from Flint, Michigan, Kungana Drum and Dance Company. After our performance, the next voice you will hear will be that of our keynote, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill. Thank you.